and wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. And it is, well, it, for some people, would have been a very dark day in TFC land, considering the results of last night. But for some of you, there is a ray of sunshine. As Joe says below, Bill Manning has mutually parted ways with Toronto FC, with MLSE in specifically. It's an interesting day in TFC land, and we'll talk a little bit about it over the next, let's call it half an hour, 40 minutes, with my co-host, Jeffrey P. Nesker. Jeff, how you doing, buddy? I saw you in Hamilton last night in the stands. So it was a wet one, and it was a time. Let's put it that way.
It was a time. It was a time. I think you said it best. G Money, are you serious? No saying I'm out. When they're he's I believe he's playing softball today, so you have to you level that with him. But he's keeping healthy while I am nursing maybe the biggest hangover of the last gotta be 3-4 years. So you'll have to forgive me. I'm barely alive. But I am drinking a lot of instant coffee, so hopefully I last the show. What was your question again? How you doing? I think I got. I think you got in that verbal diarrhea. Okay, good stuff. Awesome.
Yeah, it was. We'll jump right into it because it's hard to ignore the day and sort of the moment. But Bill Manning is out as president of Toronto FC. For a lot of people, this is a great day. For other people, it's a move that is, a couple of years too late. For others, it's hard to, quote unquote, celebrate a man who's lost his job. But nonetheless, I'm a little surprised, not that it happened, but the sort of timing of it happening. But maybe we'll get your thoughts on just sort of, first of all, his tenure at TFC, and then maybe a little bit on what you think went wrong at the end, because it started off well and then it did not end well.
I agree with you. I thought he was bulletproof because he's been so instrumental in bringing the World Cup to Toronto, and the extrication of that association, right? Like this is the corporate world. But the thing that I always come back to is that no job is for life unless, you're lucky enough to be a Supreme Court justice in the United States or some of that other craziness, right? And especially an executive in a results-based industry, right? Like, most Hollywood executives, most film executives, forget Hollywood, they don't last 3 years. Like they barely have a chance to change the faff in their offices before they're out. This is a results-based business, and fair or no fair, something had to happen. There's been so much back and forth on the internet and on the social medias today with respect to something that I actually agree with. What measurable change is there going to be in the next month and a half of Manning's departure, right? We can speculate that it sort of greases the wheels for an easier transfer market. That's speculation. The fact of the matter is that this is for optics more than anything else, and that's why it doesn't surprise me. We were there last night. We were, so the advantage of a smaller crowd. And let's not to say that there wasn't a ton of people at that game last night, but the advantage of a smaller crowd and a more unified voice in the stands was they heard us when we booed that team. You said it yourself. They heard us. And I think that I mean, I don't want to suppose, but that has to be part of the equation here. You know, I also don't. I refuse to think that this was a knee jerk thing that, like, you know, they heard us booing and then gave Bill his walking papers. I have a feeling that this was in the works for a while. You know, we're not privy to all the details. Perhaps he was given an ultimatum and he didn't meet those targets. You know, I've been quoting Occam's razor a lot over the last couple of weeks. I think let's call a spade a spade. I think the performances, specifically certain players' performances in that game last night, put into sharp relief the money outlaid on non-performing players and the realization that these non-performing players are locked into some very, 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 very unfavorable deals that we can't get out of without taking a huge, huge financial hit. I think the reality of that situation became very, very clear, and someone has to answer for that. And that's why I think Bill Manning was given his walking papers. And it also can't be ignored that previously the Argos were the reason that he stuck around. You know, whether that's true or not, it's been bandied about a lot. That, you know, the Argos' success measured against TFC's failures gave him a certain margin. Well, now both teams are in hell. So there was no life raft for him to climb onto in terms of the Argos being his saving grace. That being said, I still think the World Cup thing was his get out of jail free card, and it remains to be seen what happens now, because you and I both know there's a lot of wheeling and dealing for these things. You know, a lot, my hand will grease, you know, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Well, now that back scratch has been removed, and we're still 2 years away from the culmination of this adventure to a World Cup in Toronto. So you have to wonder the calculus of dealing with the knock-on effects of taking Bill Manning out of that position and leaving that power vacuum. The ends finally justified the means for the people for the people higher up than him.
Yeah, and look, I think from that perspective, look at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment have enough people that can take that ball and run with it, right? Like I don't think you solely need Bill Manning for that. But I want to read
personal relationships, though. I think he
has a lot of yes.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. And now that those personal relationships are dust, and we're still 2 years removed. And,
yeah.
You know, we keep hearing about how much more it's going to cost. You know, people that have almost no association with the World Cup are already screaming bloody murder about the cost outlay the city's making, you know, and that sort of thing. There is consequence to this with the World Cup situation. There are consequences, and that had to be part of the calculus. And I'm impressed that the scales tipped to the level where they sent him packing, because I really did think that was his get out of jail free card.
Well, I think, look, like, and I said this to somebody earlier today, like the role of president of Toronto FC, that's why it's always first when you talk about his title, right? Because that is the driver of the position, right? Is
sure
president of Toronto FC. Therefore, the success or the failure of the football club will mainly determine the job. Like the Argos are in, you know, they have a part to play there, obviously, but it's this success or failure of Toronto FC. And I think there are several things that lead to this. You get a new CEO at MLSE in Keith Pelly, right? I think Bill Manning was able to kind of not get away with things, but in some ways kind of sell his way into more years at the job, because for a long time there were CEOs and heads of MLSE that did not really get that involved, period, but also not that involved within Toronto FC. So the board was more than happy to have somebody that knew what they were, or seemingly knew what they were doing, or had experience in the league and knew what they were doing, to sort of sell them, you know, these 5-year vision plans, these vision quests, and okay, we'll give you the money and you go do the thing, right? And then win. So that's one thing. I think also, look, you said that you don't think that the booing of fans or the vitriol of fans towards him would have played that much of a factor. I think it does. I do think that with Keith Pelly in charge, there is a bit of I don't want to call him like a Tim Leiweke effect, but he is more on that end of the scale in terms of leaders than previous, like a Michael Fizdale or something like that, right?
Sure.
So,
sure.
So I think there is something to that, to a certain extent. And look, I'll read a bit of the press statement here, because the wording here of these things are always interesting and also
Always
very
interesting.
careful. But Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment announced today that the organization and Bill Manning, who served as president of Toronto FC and the Toronto Argonauts, have mutually agreed to part ways effective today. On behalf of MLSE's board of directors and the entire organization, we want to thank Bill for his many contributions in his nearly 9 years with the company. MLSC president and CEO Keith Pelly said. Bill will always be a part of important championship history. I'll get to that in a second for both clubs. But as we evaluate the path ahead and measure against our ambition to consistently deliver contending teams, it was determined that a new direction was required. And it goes on to say, because I know some people are asking in the chat sort of what's the next sort of step. As part of the transition, Toronto FC general manager Jason Hernandez and Pinball Clemens, who's the general manager of the Argos, will report directly to Keith Pelly. So what does that mean? For the meantime, what it means is Keith Pelly will have a direct hand in transfer business. Now, I don't think he's going out and saying we should get this player and this player and this player. I think what it means is that he will be giving a lot more of the reins to Jason Hernandez, to Sean Rubio, to go after players, make roster decisions, and then he is going to give the final okay on things. And probably from there, sort of run it to the board and get that sort of squared away. So that's really what the Dirt's Pelly out already. But that's what essentially the new temporary structure will look like. Who knows? It's funny. I was just on TSN Overdrive. Our friend Joshua Cloak was mentioning that this could be sort of a test drive for Keith Pelly to see if he can have a more direct hand in bringing success to the teams under MLSE. And, you know, could this extend to the other properties like the Leafs and the Raptors? Well, maybe not the Raptors. You're never really getting rid of Masai, but, you know, from a Leafs perspective, right? So this could be the signaling of a new sort of way of managing the team, and having someone like Keith Pelly, who is very familiar with the sports scene in Toronto, has been in it for a very long time, and has actually quite a bit of history in football, you know, to make decisions and be a part of essentially, again, rebuilding this team. And of course, it doesn't speak to what does that mean for John Herdman? What does that mean for Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi? Because those players were signed essentially by Bill Manning. So what happens to them? So there's a lot of sort of questions here, but right now it looks like for the time being, Jason Hernandez and Sean Rubio have the keys, and you know, Keith Pelly is sort of in the back seat, you know, sort of checking on the homework, if you will.
So much to unpack there. I mean, Tertz said the thing that was sort of the secondary point. He stayed around so long because club value increased by $400 million while he's in charge. Not saying he's responsible for any of it. That's important. And also, we have to remember just what kind of chaos the MLSE board has been whilst we've been in the basement of MLS. I think good enough won the day. They had bigger fish to fry at that upper echelon of the corporate environment. They had infighting and finger pointing and lawsuits and bad juju. And you know, the concern wasn't mediocrity. The concern was there's a warm body handling it so we can handle our other BS, right? And I think that the perfect storm happened with Pelly. Now, my question to you is this. Do you think that's what Keith Pelly wanted? Because when you say, I agree with you. When you say booing last night had an effect, I agree. I'm not sure it had as much effect as you say or as little effect as I'm positing. It's probably somewhere in between. But my question to you is this. If that was the straw that broke the camel's back, or the last straw, or whatever euphemism you want to use, right? It's created a situation where ego is ruling again, which I don't like. So in a roundabout, my question to you is, do you think this is what Keith Pelly wanted? Do you think that when he took the job, he was always looking for a way to streamline the process and be more involved in general manager ways. Like he wanted to do a bit of GM.
Okay, so to be clear, I don't think he's necessarily going to get involved in general manager ways, right? I don't think he, again, like I said, I don't think he's picking players. I don't think he's, negotiating contracts. That is going to be Jason Hernandez.
But isn't that a power vacuum? Isn't that again going in the Bob Bradley school of too many jobs for a single person?
No, I
right?
think this is I think this is different. It slightly in the sense that I think Keith Belly will be a little bit more hands-on in terms of getting regular updates, but he's not going to tell Jason Hernandez how to do his job, right? Like he's not going to be telling Jason Hernandez, you need to go pick this player and that player, right? In the end of the day, the question will be, I think the difference may be is that, and we've talked about this before, in a lot of ways, the signing of Lorenzo Insigne, the signing of Federico Bernardeschi, maybe less so, was as much to do about the business side of things at Toronto FC than it did about the football, right? In a sense
clear
that,
as a bell, yeah.
And again, I think Joshua Cloak brought this up again in his chat with the guys on TSN Overdrive this afternoon, but he did a great job of, and this is something Bill has openly talked about, was his job was to try to, after the pandemic, bring buzz back to TFC, bring butts back to seats and sell out BMO, right? And
in a very cynical way, he did it. He did
in a way,
job.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's true, right? By getting Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi, but that might have been at the cost of what was good for the football. Right. In
100%.
theory, you go get these guys and it should work. And on paper, we said it before, like on paper, it should have worked. But, you go and you get a manager who doesn't want these players in Bob Bradley for all of Bob Bradley's faults. Right.
He was pretty
He
clear
didn't
about
want these
that.
players, but he's, the president already signed them. So you got to take them. Right.
Yep.
And from that perspective, I think that's when you run into a lot of issues. And like this even goes back further. Really, this goes back, and I've said it before, Mike said it before, like you said it as well. This goes back to losing Tim Bezbachenko and essentially picking Ali Curtis kind of over Greg Vanney, right? In terms of you have a system and you have people that understand the organization and understand who have built a foundation and have built the framework for success within your organization. And you, at that time, essentially kind of pick the new guy over the established manager who has built relationships and has done the work. Now, who knows? You gave Greg Vanney more responsibility in regards to bringing in players at the time, and maybe it wouldn't have worked. It certainly didn't exactly work in LA, though. Right now, the Galaxy are turning things around.
Yeah.
But I think from that perspective, the foundations really started to fall apart when you lose Bez in 1 year, and then you lose Vanney the next year because.
Add the pandemic and you're screwed.
Look, you get Bill Manning comes in as the president and immediately wins an MLS Cup. He was the president when you won, but he didn't build the team, right? Like that wasn't his team particularly that he built. No. So,
But I don't want to take him right out of the situation. He's still saying yes to this and yes to that.
Yeah,
he's still agreeing
agree.
to, Bez comes to his table and says, I want to do something wacky. And he says, all right, let's get nuts, right? Like he wasn't a passenger like people want to revise history, but he certainly wasn't driving the car. If anything, he had the credit card to pay for the gas on the road trip, right? Like,
exactly.
And that's still important. You need that credit card if you're gonna put gas in the car. But so the truth is always somewhere in between. I'm sorry to interrupt because I'm loving where you're going with this. So please continue.
No, well, I mean, in the end of the day, when Tim leaves, right, when Bez leaves, he starts to become more involved in the football decisions, and that's where you start to see things break down a little bit, right? And look, if you go back and do it again, most fans would probably say, yes, you give Michael Bradley the contract extension. Yes, you give Josie Altidore the contract extension, right? We were still on the
absolutely.
vibes of 2017 and nobody wanted to see them leave, right? Like, I said that as much at the time as anybody else, right?
Me
So
too.
you get it. But I think at that time you needed a soccer person that knew the league. And Ali Curtis, look, great guy, a great person. But I think I don't think one was empowered to do enough, and B, again, from what I've heard, it sounded like Bill was again in the weeds in terms of football decisions, and that comes in a little bit later as we go along. But especially with Lorenzo and Fede signing, but I
They
think
thought-
that's where the breakdown
yeah.
comes.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't upset about the Ali Curtis hire because he was Bez's boss, right? Like a lot of the stuff that Bez wrote at MLS head office was with Ali Curtis. I just think the job was too big for him, and the pressure was too big for him, and his recruitment was terrible. I mean, we all remember, like, he was instrumental in Jefferson Soteldo. And if you want to talk about scouring transfer market for Euro players, I mean, what's worse, scouring transfer market or buying somebody's sight unseen just because they wear the 10 at Santos? Like, they're both equally naive and equally doomed to failure because that was the extent of the recruitment there, and again, you can't undervalue the pandemic, right? Soteldo's recruited over Zoom, right? I firmly believe that was the beginning of the end here. Nature abhors a vacuum. I won't fault Bill Manning for stepping up and trying to occupy that vacuum. But like so many people are saying here, his time was up. This isn't a fiefdom, and you have to, whether it's fair or not, in an executive position, you often have to fall on your sword for eating the shit sandwich of somebody else is doing. In this
a lot
case,
of people fell
it's
on the
quite a
sword
bit-
before he did, right? If
Exactly.
You think about it, right?
Exactly.
Like a lot of
and
people
that's
fell on
and
the
that's
sword.
why it's overdue. You can't replace a coach again, and this is why I've been so agonizingly single-minded with my get Lorenzo out of town, because you like this idea that replacing fringe players is going to fix this team. It's the same idea as firing the coach when your general manager is bulletproof, right? Like, address the problem. Stop telegraphing it or projecting it onto other people. So, like, it's annoying. Oh, what's James Grossi doing here?
Yeah, I invited a guest. I didn't really
Oh,
join
sweet.
so early.
Sweet.
But let's bring him on.
Amazing. Hey, James, this is a surprise to me. I got to qualify this. I'm very, very hungover, so don't ask me any direct questions. Just let me laugh along, all right?
Ladies and gentlemen, special guest James Grossi from TorontoFC.ca is joining us. James, how you doing, buddy?
I'm a little bit blinded by this late evening sun streaming through my window, so I might be a little more squinty than usual. But I have a regular date with my nephews every week. We go to McDonald's on Tuesdays, but Tuesday this week was a little bit busy, so we had to reschedule it. And thankfully,
what's your go-to?
Mine? I discovered triple cheeseburgers, man. Triple cheeseburgers are a thing that I didn't know McDonald's rolled with. I was aware of the double, but the triple cheeseburger is where it's at these days for me. And my nephews are strictly nuggets and fries, but we're trying to get them to venture out a little bit. So I've indoctrinated.
They're good lads. If you had nuggets
and
fries,
did they get the throwback sauces? Which throwback sauce do they go for?
They are sauce free. They're straight up nuggets.
Straight nug.
They're psychopaths. You can tell them I said that. They're absolute psychopaths.
I have some concerns, but one battle at a time.
They sound solid to me, James. They sound solid to me. So you've come in at an interesting and actually really great time, because we are talking obviously about Prince Owusu's big toe. No, we're talking about Bill Manning's mutually parting of the ways with MLSE. And one of the things I talked about in terms of just the timeline of Bill and sort of going back to really the epicenter of where this sort of breakdown might have come is losing Bezbatchenko, and then him sort of starting to make more football decisions with Bez not there. And I wanted to get your take on this, because you've seen a lot. You've been in those rooms with gentlemen, but like what's sort of your general feeling around this move, and is it as mutual as the statement says?
I mean, mutual, it's one of those words that kind of means 1,000 different things in this industry. It's one of those where, the press releases don't always give you the full story. So, I don't know what that means, to be completely frank. And we're still, in the first day. We haven't been able to have any conversations with Jason Hernandez or with anyone else at the club to get a sense of what things look like going from here. In terms of the Bezbatchenko departure, I think what I would say about Bill was I was never quite sure how involved he was supposed to be with the football operations side of things. You know, I to be perfectly frank, I don't know what a club president's responsibilities are. Like
That's
my
very
my
telling.
understanding is sort of like, especially within the MLSE structure, it's more of a liaison between the higher ups and the club, and so you know Bill would be responsible for putting together those 5-year plans that he talked about all the time, and for the budget reviews, and for informing the board of what was going on at the club. And so, how exactly that works, I'm sure with every president in this situation, it works a little bit differently depending on the personalities, depending on the structures below them. And so, when you look back at Bill coming on board when Bez was already in place and when Greg Vanney was in place, one of the things we always said about TFC in the front office was they tended to do things in the wrong order. You never had your top guy come in and then he brings the guy below him and then they get their coach below them. And so, Bill came into a situation that was heading in the right direction. And then when things didn't go in the right direction, there were changes, and I think we kind of knew that the leash was short. I think the generally accepted time frame is you get 2 or 3 coaches, you get 2 or 3 coaching hires before it starts becoming your name that's on the block. And the last couple of years for this team, although on paper a lot of the decisions looked like either a good solution or the best available solution. Like if we go back to the Chris Armas hire during the pandemic, I'm not sure how many options they really had at that time, given just the state of the world and the fact that as a coach you're not allowed to you basically have to join a club, but you can't play in that city. Like it was just a complicated time. We saw guys like Thierry Henry decide that they couldn't deal with that at the moment, and he ended up leaving Montreal. So there was a bunch of complicating factors to a lot of the decisions. But, that said, on paper, Ali Curtis, bringing in an Ali Curtis, a guy who has filled the role that he did with the league, who knows the rule book in and out, on paper, that makes sense. Bringing in a Chris Armas guy, a guy who, again, knows the league and knows the player pool and was a real, motivational leader. And we're seeing the success that he's having in Colorado with a different group.
Yep.
So it's not always the personality. Sometimes it's the fit. Sometimes it's the timing. Sometimes it's the situation that they're coming into. And then even Bob Bradley, like I remember being at the press conference where Bob Bradley was introduced and walking away and going, if I need a guy to come in and sort of revitalize a club from top to bottom with a vision for how a football club should go about doing things, I couldn't think of very many names higher up that list in North America than Bob Bradley.
Yep.
So
100%.
At a time like this, it's really easy to point fingers and be like, oh, this is the reason that things have happened. But it's never quite that simple. And I think when we this is a bit of a tangent for me, but I remember when Mo Johnson left, I wrote a piece about how just sort of wondering how Mo was going to be looked at 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, when the scars aren't too fresh and we're sort of looking at the big picture of like, wow, this team was born, had great success with its fan base, didn't really replicate it on the field, but they selected a guy in the draft pick that ended up getting us a field turf instead of playing on that plastic pitch. So like time changes all those things. And I think a lot of the things that Bill did weren't necessarily the kind of things that we see on the pitch on Saturdays. I think he built a lot of strong relationships off the field with the local soccer community and many of the other communities around the game. And so, yeah, I think you could say it's been a mixed bag in terms of the big swings in the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm still very much processing today's news and and very much in the dark in terms of what sort of comes next.
That's so telling. I just gotta, the way that you spoke reminds me of the bad film sets that I've been on, because nature abhors a vacuum, right? And when you have 14 different people all claiming the same responsibility, nothing gets done. Or when it gets done late and it gets done badly, right? So that just, my spidey senses were tingling, because I can instantly put myself in that environment, because I've been there, right? In those high pressure situations where the center does not hold. So, running with that thought, it's amazing to me that it's lasted this long, because, I'm going to use the Hollywood thing again. Like, the big swings are what you hang your hat on, right? Nobody cares about the $5 million movie that broke even. People care about the $300 million movie that didn't make back its investment, right? Like, you can have a million little hits, but if you have one big swing that fails, you're out, right? And so, off the back of Soteldo and Salcedo and losing Ali Curtis, that's traditionally enough to see a GM go, right? I guess, you weren't here for our how we open this, which is Mike and I coming on different sides of the equation on, did we end Bill Manning at TFC, like the 50 of us at Tim Hortons Field last night booing the team? Do we have that power? And I don't think so. I think it's part of the equation, but I refuse to see it as the full straw that broke the camel's back. Mike errs further on the side of, yeah, we have that power. And I wonder how you feel about it being so close to the.
Before you answer, James,
fire.
I'll qualify that by saying I don't think that was the thing, but I do think, and you and I've had this conversation too, I think the vitriol around him in terms of his position, the tenure, the last 3 years, how things have gone, the way last year went and how the DPs went so left, I think that is a part of the equation that leads to this decision today.
Yeah, I tend to err on the side of, or I tend to lean in the direction of, MLSE has a new head at the moment, and so I think there was always going to be a grace period where they assessed the land, and I was in Hamilton last night. You could hear pretty clearly the frustrations that were voiced by the supporters.
It was a time, let me tell you.
It was a time.
And Bill has very much been a magnet for that, especially in the last couple of years. I think part of that is he's been the one ever present over this period that sort of can draw that attention, if you will. So yeah, until we know more about how mutual it was, or what those decisions were, or what's coming next, it's really hard to say. There's been some talk that maybe there will be a restructuring, and they're not going to need club presidents because the current head will be a little bit more hands-on in terms of taking on a bit of that role. Yeah.
That scares me.
I think it totally comes down to what exactly that role is. Like, I mean, again, we're getting into territory where I'm a little bit above my skis in terms of the high level operations of
and we don't want to get you in trouble with the mothership either. So
no, I don't think they'd mind me having opinions, but I just mean more sort of in terms of giving people any insight in the sense of, okay, this is what's required in that role. I always sort of felt that when Bill did get involved, and when he did his transfer market search and picked up Lorenzo, like, that became sort of a meme of a joke. Then I think that overlooked the fact that, like, maybe part of that position was that blue sky, big picture, spitballing idea, like have those dreams and then kick that down to the scouting department and to the technical side and to the coach and be like, okay, this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking. How does this sit with you? Do you think that will, like, so I don't know exactly how those conversations go on.
That's so fair.
And to be honest, like, I think you kind of need somebody who's a little bit over ambitious in some of those ratings.
100%. For
When
this club,
we
100%. Yeah.
well, and
100%.
that's what led to the bloody big deal in the first place. I'm
Mhm.
blanking on the name right now, but it was Tom. What was his name?
Tim Lewicki.
Tim
Tim Lewicki. Yeah,
Lewicki.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tim came in and he wanted to hit those home runs, and
Mhm.
you kind of need somebody in the corporate side that's willing to go to bat for those and to make those arguments and to lay out the case for why investing this much money on player A is going to be beneficial to the corporation in its way. So it's a little bit of a black box. And for all the times that we interacted with Bill, I couldn't tell you that I fully ever got underneath the sort of salesman element with Bill. Like I never knew. I knew what his message was, but I didn't know what he was thinking about it per se. And maybe that's sort of the role. Maybe that's sort of the role. Like, is that your job is to go out there and to swing big and to be the suit and to take those slings and arrows for the rest of the team so that they can get on with the rest of their job. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a change at TFC, just seeing what this post Bill Manning era will look like.
Well, before we fully, put a wrap on the Bill Manning era, let's talk a little bit about last night and the legacy he leaves behind, which is
First, let me just throw this in there because, revisionist history, and there's this temptation to say, Bill basically said, I want, opened up transfer market, said, this is my guy, and then just did it. And everybody else was standing there going, no, this is a terrible idea. And he was like, I don't care. This is what I want. I don't know the truth, but I'm going to say, I'll bet heavy that that's not the case. Right. But I will say that there was probably a lot of strong arming that Mike opened with, where the sales were, we're going to get butts in seats over and above, does this work for the footballing side of the equation? And I think that's where it started to go wrong. He was an unqualified success. If you want to be cynical about it, we're still averaging 25 to 30K a game. So he fulfilled that mandate of getting butts in seats. They're just angry butts in seats, right? That are threatening to leave those seats perpetually. But that's not his problem. And so, yeah. And then just my second point, and I kind of interrupted you by saying it, this idea that there'll be no club president anymore, despite what that role entails, reeks of cost saving. And that scares me. We're gonna pare down. We're gonna because they always sell it as we're gonna be streamlined and disciplined, and it's gonna be a tighter ship with less cooks and less chefs spoiling the recipe. But the reality is it's eliminating salaries to streamline cost. I'm all for it if it means that they'll take getting rinsed on a buyout of one specific player. I don't feel like it's going in that direction. I feel it's more, moving around deck chairs in the Titanic. But Mike, you have something that you desperately want to get in. So.
Two things, and James, I think you'll have some perspective on this. One, I think, yes, of course, there are just as many, like just you saying, like averaging 28,000 a game. That's great. I do, though, believe that from a general perspective, and now I know we're talking to all the sickos out there, so this is going to not make a lot of sense to you, but from a casual perspective, TFC has lost a lot of relevancy in the marketplace, right? Like, in the sense that people will go to games, but do people talk about the team? Do people outside of the bubble really sort of talk about what's going on with this team? And are they as engaged as they were in the championship years or in the years where they were winning? No, right? That's just not the case. And I could confidently say that as somebody who's employed with another team that technically this team competes with to get butts and seats at the same time. So in a way, yes, he did succeed in that way. But I also think there is a failure there because I think when he took the reins, this team was relevant in the market. It really was challenging the Jays. It was really challenging other summer sort of entertainment options in the city. And something that, that sports like broadcasters and were taking seriously as a thing to cover. I think now, and you just have to look at the press conference at the end of the year, the end of the season press conferences to know the relevancy of the team in the market. It's just not there. It is just simply not there. And that is something he, as president, is part of his job and he has to wear. And then the second part about, making these big swings and trying to make them marry from a business perspective and from a footballing perspective, I think what was been missing is you go and make the big swings. You should do that. You're Toronto FC. You've got the money. You're one of the consistently highest spending teams in Major League Soccer. You kind of have to now. You put yourself in that category. But I think there has been a lack of coordination from that. We're going to make a big swing, get butts in seats, be relevant, sell shirts, sell commercial partnerships through this player, etc., and linking it to the football. And that is where the disconnect has been. And I think, I'm not Keith Belly. Keith Belly. He has some relevant football experience. I'm not calling him a football operator, but there's going to have to be some shuffling to make that work. Right. And that's sort of the next step. Obviously, this is a temporary sort of measure for now. We'll see what happens in the offseason, because I think that move kind of happens in the offseason unless the right person shows up, in the next couple of weeks. But James, want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think just on that point of the football and the business side, I think you want there to be a healthy tension there. You want both those considerations to get their equal voice, and you would hope that in the end the decision is made that benefits both. I think that's sort of what you're looking for, is you want those two drives, because as much as we all want this to be all about the game and all that sort of thing, like it is a business flat out, and so you have to have those considerations. I think. I wonder how much the turmoil in general of the last 4 years, just stretching back through everything, have made so when you have those two sides, both sides has their cases and both sides has their defenses against getting steamrolled. And I'm just getting a little extra blinded right here. Has their defenses in terms of getting overrun by the other side's argument. And I think when you go through the twists and turns that the team has had the last couple of years, I think you sort of lose that balance. You can lose that balance a little bit.
100%.
I'm still racking my brains to try and figure out why it is that I put this in that category of bringing Bob Bradley in was a good solution, and it didn't work. Bringing Chris Armas in might not have been the most star-studded, but it should have been an adequate one. Like, signing Federico Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Insigne should be something that just kind of works, and it hasn't for the club the last couple of years. I think we've seen some good signs this year, and so I guess where I would land on the tension between the business and the football side is that you sort of have to place your faith in the fact that John Herdman is in position now. And however we see the president / front office role shake out, that, John has only ever spoken highly of working with Jason Hernandez, and they've been getting those structures inside the club sorted out after the decay is not the right word, but after the disruptions of the last couple of years. They've been working on solidifying out their scouting network, solidifying out all their video stuff. So you sort of have to hope that the disruptions of the past will always have a little bit of a ripple into the future, and then going forward, that's something that they're very much, cognizant of. And I'm forgetting what the other side of the conversation was, Michael.
The football side. But if I could just, well, unless you got it back. Do you have it back? Are you ready to go?
No. You keep going, I'll think.
Well, okay. So when you talk about art and commerce, the football side versus the business side, I refer to it as art and commerce. You can say sport and commerce, but it's the same thing. I think it's important to say that the commerce side has also gone a bit chaotic, because sure, MLS occupies a unique, unenviable position in the global soccer market. You have to overpay for players, but that doesn't mean you should overpay and also lock yourself into a 5-year deal with no chance of extricating yourself from it, unless you're willing to get rinsed on paying someone to not play for you. That's just bad business, right? And so at the end of the day, the business side was sort of subservient to the football side, and there was no thought to the football side. It was like, oh, the football side will just work itself out. But you know, we left ourselves no recourse if it didn't. And I'm not sure that you have to make a bet like that in MLS anymore. I think that's 5-6 years ago thinking, you know. And I think that if there's anything that we're going to put Manning's feet over the coals for, it's that there was no exit strategy here. It was either going to work or spectacularly fail. And that's a bad bet. You know, ambition is great, but, you know, you don't want to sink the whole ship, right? Like and we're dealing with that now. And so I think that, you know, you can't argue for the business acumen in this kind of, in this specific situation, because there was none. It was an all in. It was all in. We bet the house.
I think so, but I also think that you if you were to put restrictions on the table, like maybe a 5-year contract is what gets you through the door to have that conversation. And every time, you know, you have to give your star players no trade contracts. You have to give them, you know, the VIP parking spot. And if you're not willing to extend those bridges, then you are limiting yourself in a way. So I understand what you mean about the business element of tying your hands for the future, but I also think that the other side of that is by not committing, then you're not going to get the return. And so you kind of have to be all in with these guys. Yeah.
I don't disagree, but I do think that I would hope, because certainly it seems, you know, in this revised narrative where everything's binary, that nobody was standing there going, we're kind of, where's the exit strategy here? Oh, there is none. Bill, maybe this is a terrible idea, right? And that's revisionist history, but, like, you know, it's not worth it. If player X, the only way they're coming to play for you is if you give them the house and your firstborn son, maybe you go for player Y, right? Like, it's, you know, like, it's so easy to get caught up in the chase.
But what happens if player Y asks for something similar because they know player X? Like we're getting into the weeds of contract
but
stuff.
You're seeing it with the U.S. men's national team now, and I almost tweeted this out. You know, they've played their hand, right, by aggressively courting the Klopps and the Hervé Renards. They're going to end up paying Steve Cherundolo $40 million to coach the U.S. men's national team, right? Like that, and that's just that's the reality of the situation, right? Like when they finally get into the end run of this, they've already shown that they have no aces in their hand, right? And they've already shown that they're willing to spend that kind of money, and they're going to get stooped for it, right? Like you know. This business isn't so removed from other businesses that you can just say that's just soccer, right? Because in any other business, that's such a bad play that you deserve to fall on your sword immediately for even entertaining the idea. Now, I agree that this is slightly different and that there's things going on, like movies. Occasionally, you know, you're paying Tom Cruise more than the movie costs to be your star. But there has to be some accountability, right? Like, MLS is not 20th Century Fox. Like, MLS is not making Mission Impossibles. They're making Mission not, you know, Possible. Like, they're making the TV movie of Mission Impossible.
Yeah,
so
but I think
we shouldn't be held to that standard, right? Like,
but I think you're seeing that now. I think, like, part of this is, again, that the vitriol around about Bill Manning, and like I said this last year, right? Like, he is the constant thread through all of this. Right? Like, you fired GMs, you fired managers, you've gotten rid of technical direct, like, you've gotten rid of all these pieces, and he's the guy who's remained. Right? So at some point, you kind of have to look around the room and say, maybe it's you, right? Because all these people are pretty smart, right? And in terms of football, like you said, Bob Bradley, you know, you bring him in, almost everybody's like, that's the right guy to turn the ship around.
Oh, right? My God, I was doing backflips. Right? Yeah,
exactly. So, like, all of a sudden, he didn't forget how to manage football. He didn't forget how to work a dressing room, right? Like, it didn't just happen because he got to TFC. Sometimes you do have to find the common thread, and it was Bill Manning. And if I can get this sort of roundabout to last night, the legacy that gets left behind is now you have a team, as you said, Jeff, who has laid out everything to get Federico Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Insigne, and then get their budget cut because they've spent unwisely, and now don't have a team good enough to compete, right? And now you go out and you play a Canadian Premier League team. And now, look, I think a lot of people have labeled this like the biggest upset or embarrassment in club history. I'll tell you, there have been bigger ones than this.
Absolutely, Forge are good.
Forge
are a really
I'm
good
sorry,
team.
guys. Forge are good.
Yeah.
And yes, we gave them 2 goals, but Forge are good, and they capitalized on those opportunities, and then did a fantastic job defending, especially Federico Bernardeschi, right? So, from that perspective, the legacy left behind is a team that, in many ways, is overpaid. Too threadbare. Even if you had Oso and Richie, maybe the outcome changes a little bit. But I still think you get yourself into a decent match last night, right? But what you end up is a threadbare team with 2 stars that just for whatever reason, and I'm not going to get into their psyches. I'm not going to get into their brains.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. 100%.
They just right now. I don't want to say they don't.
I hate the right now. I hate the right now qualification. Can we just say aren't working? Like, can we just? You want to tie a bow on stuff? Let's tie a bow on this. I love Berna. Berna has redeemed himself in my eyes. I can't it's crazy that happened, and I was prepared to have the same response with Lorenzo, but at this point I'm not prefacing it's not working with any caveats. It's not working. I mean, especially with the $15 million man.
Yeah, I think you're getting good individual play, but that individual play is not enough to carry a team.
I don't even think that.
Yeah, it's for what it's worth, I do think having Oso and Richie back would have made a big difference, because I think what we're seeing with those 2 right now, and this goes back to another thing that Bob used to say all the time, was this, that they needed to get enough football around those 2 guys to really get the most out of them. And the thing that I've noticed with Lorenzo the last couple of games is how deep he's dropping to get on that ball. And like you don't want him picking up the ball from Davy Flores out on the right touchline 15 yards inside your own half. Like, that's not 100%. Where you want to get Lorenzo on the ball. Yeah. And I asked John about this, and he said that no, that isn't where ideally they would like to get it. But I think when you are missing Oso, the guy, you're missing Oso, you're missing Alonso Coelho, who's been the real link up guy between the defensive element and that attacking element. I think Fede and Lorenzo feel like they've had to do a lot of it themselves. And the fact that they haven't been able to find consistent pieces around them to learn and to adapt and to grow together in terms of how to get the most out of them. So I think my bigger point is that as much as it is not bearing the fruits right now, I don't think you can put it entirely just on those 2. I the way that I would kind of put that.
But I'm so sick of them getting a free pass while Cozy Thompson catches strays. Well, everybody's raging about how crap Raul Petretta is and completely ignoring. They get a free pass. And this game of if only when is such insanity, right? Like, and then this idea of like, Alan said it just there. Like, how is anybody going to learn when they only pass to each other? What kind of expectation is that? Like, just show up and make runs and potentially injure yourself and devalue yourself as a player and ruin this game that you love mentally, like create bad habits and mental blocks and existential crises for those two guys that are that kind of body language, that kind of demonstrable negativity all around, and won't play with you. Like, that's a terrible ask, man. You know what I mean? And these are kids, right? So I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. I don't want to. And I'm not even lacing up my boots. I don't want to. I don't want to give anything to these guys. Why should I?
I think it's a little bit of both. Right? Like, it's a little bit of both. Like, there's blame on both ends, if you want to say the word blame, right? Like, in terms of the fact that you don't have enough quality around them, and sometimes they, don't play with the rest of the team because they don't trust them all the time, right? On the pitch. In
And it's a
certain
two-way
situations.
street. You have to build trust. Why did they just get a free pass to be trusted? Because they played in a Euro once? Because they played on Napoli? That's insanity. Like the eye test, if we're serious about footballing, like judge it on the eye test. Like you open this with by saying, I don't want to suppose their mental state. I just want to judge their performance on the field. Let's do it. There is nothing about their performances on the field. I mean, let's talk. Fede's separate. He was all
No, but
alone.
you can't now then put the counter that you've lumped them together. But let's just stop for a really quick second.
Sure.
And let's give a little actual credit to Forge, because as much as we said TFC played like crap, there's a reason they did, and it's because Forge had a better game plan.
100%.
Simply put, they had a better game plan, and in a lot of ways, John Herdman was outdone by Bobby Smith.
You're right. I'll stop. I've said everything I needed to say about this. I'm just grinding metal.
Yeah. I know, and we've talked about this before, but in terms of this game, there's a comment here from Kevin who's saying, "Can we sign Owolabi, Bellawoo, or Matuza? Dear God, they were good last night. They were good last night."
Sure
and
were.
Owolabi Bellawoo was a Toronto FC Academy player that we let go. So keep that in mind. But I think. At the end of the day, you do have a team that is unfortunately reverting back to the soft, mentally kind of weak team that we ran into last year, right? I think we felt like that was starting to get solved at the beginning of the year. We felt like this team was starting to make inroads in that process. And I still do think that this team overall is probably better than last year. However, the mentality side of this team they just fall apart too easily. And last night was no exception. Okay, you get chipped from inside, from outside your own half. You ask your goalkeepers to play that high. That will happen from time to time, and it's happening more in the game as managers ask their goalkeepers to play that high. But the fight back after that was just not there. And it couples with a very good game plan from Forge and players that can on their day challenge you at that level. And that's Absolutely. How you end up with a 2-1 loss in the first leg of a semifinal.
A question to the gallery, because it's coming up. Do you think Herdman was outcoached? Because I don't think that's fair to John Herdman. I think, we were talking about how deep Lorenzo's going, of his own volition to get involved in the buildup, right? And John saying that ideally that's not where I would have Lorenzo. One, I don't think there's any shame in being outcoached by Bobby Smirniotis, because he's just that good. And if you give him enough of a runway to game plan out a game of this magnitude, he's going to have a superb game plan, because that's in his wheelhouse. But I don't think it's fair to say to just say that John Herdman got out coached on the night and end with that. I think the inmates are running the asylum. His game plan was not his game plan. And if it was, then we're in a much bigger trouble than letting go of Bill Manning, right? So I don't think that's a fair assessment, and I wonder if you agree with me.
I think you can't in a perfect laboratory experiment where you put both coaches' tactical blueprints into the mixer and see which one comes out on the day. Maybe you could have a statement either way, but I think you have to take into consideration the circumstances of that game. Toronto are exhausted. They're a thin squad. They're on a horrible run of matches of late. We spoke to John before the game, and before the match against Simcoe County, before the series against Saint Laurent, he had crafted motivational elements to get his team to take the occasion as with as much focus and attention to detail as he could. And I asked him the same question heading into this match against Forge of what was, it doesn't have to be a goal record, but what was the focus that he wanted to put in front of this group? And he said the only one that he needed was that, they're 2 90-minute matches away from reaching a final, from playing for a cup final. And, I'm trying to remember exactly how those first couple minutes of the game played out, because, minutes 11 to minutes 15 kind of destroyed any impression that you may have gotten through those
TFC
first
probably
couple of
should have
minutes.
gone up 1-0 within those first five.
Yeah, that's
I remember
yikes.
Lorenzo put one just wide from close range
Yeah.
pretty early. And I think what we've seen with TFC over this season, over last season, is there is that frailty of no matter how well things are going for them, the second that something goes wrong, it negates all of the good work that was done before.
Yep.
That.
And this is what I've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's what we saw last night. It was a team who in the back of their minds they knew that it was going to be not even that they knew, because they knew it was going to be difficult. You don't go into Forges Stadium and think that it's going to be easy like it was in the last two rounds. You have to know what you're getting into, and I think they knew that. And I think what we saw was that sort of voice that's in the back of everybody's mind, that no matter how confident you are, no matter how much you have faith in your abilities, there's a little nagging voice that says that you can't do this. Look at what's happened these last couple of times. You're not capable of this. And I think, TFC are dealing with that ghost a little bit at the moment. And, you can have the best tactical plan in the world and that can all be undone. You can have the best messaging, you can have the best setup, you can have the best players in the right positions, but if that faith element leaves you at a certain point, then you're going to be rocked. And I think that's what we saw. I think it took TFC a good 15, 20 minutes to sort of dig themselves out of that shell-shocked, what is going on here kind of moment before they found their way back into that game. And just in terms of giving Forge and Bobby credit, I tried to get both Bobby and Kwasi Poku in the post-match press conferences to let us in a little bit and tell us what this meant, because Forge has had plenty of big matches over the years. They've had plenty of big wins, but I have to imagine that defeating Toronto FC, the team that came into your stadium and beat you in a shootout to lift the Voyageurs Cup, even if that was the pandemic weird version of the Canadian Championship. But also, the MLS team that's lifted an MLS Cup, the team that has, for all good and evil and for all that it's never just a one-person team, the team that's been sort of the vanguard for this regeneration of the sport in our country over these past 20 years. I had to think that was something special. And Poku is another guy who spent some time in the TFC Academy.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned it. There's a lot of history and bad blood with those players in the TFC.
Bad blood, but yeah, I get.
I tried. It can't be good blood. Yeah.
I tried to get both of them to open up a little bit, and Bobby's response was, talk to me after the second game. He rain checked me pretty hard on that one, trying to sort of giving it the old, it doesn't matter unless we're getting through, which is always sort of the case with a two-leg situation. And Kwasi, I should have followed it up. I missed a good chance for a follow-up question. I asked him how he would remember this night, and his response was that his parents would remind him, which was a little bit cryptic. He had a little bit of a mischievous look in his face before he gave us that answer, and the question should have been like, what are they going to remind you of? Why are they going to remind you? And I think he was hinting. I think that's what he was hinting at, and so that's just another element that a TFC team that's frail as they are didn't have the fortitude to put up with revenge, and revenge is a hell of a powerful motivator.
It's a dish best served cold and wet, and guess what it was at Tim Hortons Field last night? Well, not cold, but wet. It was a dish best served wet, which makes no sense, but if you permit me the bastardization of that metaphor, we're all good.
And I did remember Mike's other point. It was on the attention economy right now for soccer and TFC and the loss of that. I've been doing this long enough that there's the rhythm to every season where, opening day, the start of training camp, there's tons of cameras around and tons of media bodies around. And then by the time you get to week 3, it's the old standards once again. And that's sort of life of a soccer reporter in this situation. And the thing that I'm wondering, and we all know what's been going on in the media business in terms of the bodies and the jobs and everything that's going on there, was that more a big event coverage of team is in championship, team is in the verge of winning a championship, team are in the playoffs, or was that the new normal that we should have expected it in those times? And
Hmm.
you know, I I don't know. I honestly don't know where the media landscape is right now when it comes to soccer. You know, we've all been watching Canada at this Copa America and seen all the attention that it's garnered. But where will that be in 7 days when the U20s kick off their CONCACAF champions?
So fair. So fair.
CONCACAF championship. It won't be there.
Mm-hmm.
When the women
Yeah.
are in the Olympics, it'll be the same. They'll be the same. You know, news hits every 15 minutes, everyone talking about the game, the whole nation watching the games. When the U20 women are playing in the U20 World Cup in Colombia in August, are we going to see that attention? So I have a hard time with necessarily blaming anybody at Toronto FC for that lack of attention, because the getting the eyeballs to pay attention is not the job. And as
Yeah.
much as it's a part of the job, the way that you address that as a club is you make them cover you by doing big things. You make them cover you by
100%.
playoffs. You make them cover you by winning trophies. You make them cover you by
Yeah, you
being in the
can't
Champions League.
beg people to come cover you, right? Like you have to make them want to. It's a very old lesson. And you don't want the people that you've begged to cover you, right? Because then you're just getting crap coverage that's self-serving and that sort of thing. So
But this was to my point, right? My point was that I think this was missed. You know, if you have you're in a situation where you make better decisions, where you build a team that is is constantly competing, you've got the attention of media that will then follow you on a regular basis. When you have such a sudden drop off like that,
we're starting a GoFundMe for a trip to Blinds to go for Grossi. I'm telling you,
yeah, that's what ends up happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's where you lose that media attention and you lose that general interest in the club. James, we're gonna leave off on this one last thing. Because we keep getting asked
before we blind you.
Before we blind you is basically the transfer window. All right, this is being asked. G Money really needs to know about the transfer window, so let's go about this. This moving, changing, ever morphing transfer date, and
the 18th,
sort of
right?
So to put some context into it for those who don't understand what I'm talking about here. Technically, the MLS transfer window / player movement window for the summer starts on July 18th. Canada Soccer has a different start date for that. Traditionally, it's been at the beginning of July, around the 5th, call it that. I think it was supposed to start the 5th this year. They changed it to the 18th, like without telling CPL clubs specifically to match the MLS window. I think now they've reversed that, so now it starts tomorrow, technically. But I don't think TFC are going to be beholden to that. I think they're going to be beholden to the 18th
to
window.
the MLS rules. Yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, at least in terms of what they can announce, right? They probably won't announce anything until after the 18th to be in line with that. In terms of, I'm going to ask you for transfer rumors because if that's always a murky water. But in terms
Andre
of
Bellotti.
the transfer window, what have you been hearing about that in terms of how that impacts TFC and if that's impacting them really at all?
Can I piggyback on that because I started something like hours ago. Nathan John, I'm not confident Jason Hernandez is the right person to choose players moving forward. Are you crazy? Have you seen what he's been able to do with like 2 sticks to rub together and like a nickel and hope, some duct tape and a nickel? He got I can't think of anybody better. He's a MLS roster mechanism nerd, and I absolutely if we want to celebrate the Bezbatchenko era, I mean, the greatest thing about Tim Bezbatchenko is that he was playing the long game before anybody realized that the long game existed, right? Like, that's the path to success in this league, is you got to be aware of all the levers you can pull and the way you can maximize all these roster relief mechanisms and the labyrinthine MLS rules. I dispute that entirely. I think he's the perfect guy to lead us into this next thing. My issue is just how much control he's going to get.
Well, so what I would say about Jay is I got to know him pretty well when he was a player with the club, and the thing that always stood out to me, and I'm not going to say that he said this, but I have a recollection of him sort of saying this kind of thing, was that, you know, he was never the fastest player, he was never the strongest player, and so what allowed him to have a 14, 15, 16, 17 year career as a professional soccer player was that he was willing to work as hard or harder than anyone else.
Amazing.
And that's been the same trait that I've seen from him as a front office person. You know, he put 2 or 3 years since retiring into learning the ropes of the everyday business around the club and to familiarizing himself with all of the roster innovations, as MLS calls them, I guess. And he's a guy that you know, you're not gonna hit a home run with every recruiting element that you have. You know, for every Prince Owusu that comes and takes a couple of months to get settled, and you can sort of see the value that the guy brings. There's going to be those longer bets like a Cassius Malula, who we don't know how that's going to pan out quite yet, and that's just kind of the risk of transfer markets. Is you are trying to transpose information from one environment and figure out what that's going to look like in a different environment, and there's always an element of chance in that. So
absolutely.
And then in terms of rumors, you know, we haven't, or at least I haven't heard anything specific, but what I can say is that the last couple of times we've talked to John about, you know, what he's looking at as what's going to get the team out of the current funk that they're in. He has specifically referenced the opening of the transfer window, and he's gone so far as to say that, like, they have players identified, they have players where there have been conversations, and that he was anticipating that, of course, if everything goes to plan, that as soon as that transfer window opens, whichever day it is, I just pulled up my inbox, and Canada Soccer sent out a clarification regarding some of the transfer window shenanigans that have been going on in the last little while, but it's probably going to take me a bit of time to digest exactly what this means. But the larger point is that Herdman and Hernandez and everyone always knew that the rebuilding process that they're going through right now was going to be an ongoing thing. And so the work that they put in before the season would have carried on into this window, and the identification in terms of vulnerabilities where in the team they needed to find some depth would have been ongoing this whole time. And so, you know, I'm not going to tell you that when the clock strikes midnight, they're going to have 4 new players to sign. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what their cap situation is. But John has been speaking recently as though he anticipates players coming in, and that the players that are currently here are basically on audition for whether they're going to be a part of it next year. As much as the majority of the squad was on guaranteed contracts coming into this year, I think going into next year, a lot of those are gone.
Evaporate.
So, So a lot of the tied hands that maybe made this a little bit more of a year where you kind of go with what you have in house, a lot of those restrictions will fade away in the future. So I'm not going to promise anybody anything. I'm not expecting to be on a conference call at, you know, July 18th at 12:02 a.m. introducing Bellotti or whoever it is that.
No, it's going to be exclusively players from Newcastle and Sheffield United's academy. That's it.
That's very true. Very true. There are a couple of guys at TFC2 that have come across from Sheffield. And
imagine that was the signing. The reaction in this room would not be great from that perspective. All right, I think we can wrap it up there. We've gone. I
can't believe I made it through a whole hour and 13 minutes. I honestly thought I was going to pass out when we started this thing.
But we made it. We made it, y'all. But Bill Manning did not. But he's probably got another job lined up. Let's be real. These guys are always lining up another job. We'll probably hear about him somewhere in the league soon. Thank you for tuning in to another Toronto Till I Die episode. Follow us on all the socials. Just search Toronto Till I Die, and you'll follow us there. If you're listening on the podcast version, please, thank you for downloading. Please leave us a rating, leave us a review. That'd be amazing. If you're obviously watching on YouTube, you've already probably subscribed. But if you haven't, please do, and give us a little thumbs up there as well.
And
Jeffrey,
please give heavy to James's blinds to go GoFundMe. Like we need to preserve his eyesight.
I do have curtains. It's just it's the one time of day where like if I close the curtains, then it's absolute pitch blackness in here. So I didn't want it to be like just a voice from the shadows.
All right. So it's a GoFundMe for a ring light for you then. I think that's a far better, far easier target to hit.
Yeah,
so there we
go. Exactly. All right. For Jeffrey P. Nesker, for James Grossi, I'm Mike Newell. We will see you next week. Cheers, everybody.
Do.
And wait. And baby, I'm TFC till I die.